Boo! Hello and welcome. A very warm welcome to you. Welcome to the Midday Show. It is midday, funnily enough, a Wednesday, and it's me, all by myself today. But not by myself, because hopefully I have an absolutely fantastic guest. But I want to do some hellos first. So if you're watching, well, let's be having you then. Say hello. Be like that then. No, just joking. Just kidding. But just let the numbers go up a bit, then we get our guest on, and I really very much hope he's going to join us soon. Right, two people we have watching. So who have we got? Let's say hello to you. Do have a really interesting a guest today, or at least I hope we do. It's all confirmed, but well, you know, things happen. So we'll see. So, where are you? Let's be having you. Been a bit light on comments recently. I don't know if I'm saying anything that's particularly uncontroversial, so nobody feels like commenting. Maybe I need to be a little bit more controversial. But anyway, who have we got watching? Hopefully we're talking to Dr. Asa, who is a regular on the show today. Just hoping the communication trial between us has worked. And he's going to be with us. Hello, Neil. You'll do, said Liz. Thank you very much. But I don't think I'll have to do, because today, now announcing live on the Midday Show, Dr. Asa Don Brown. Hello.
Good morning.
What time is it? What time is it where you are? You're behind us, aren't you? I think
7:05.
7:05. Thank you so much for getting up so early to be on. That's 7:05 in the morning, I take it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Asa Don Brown. I know you've listened to this show. I've seen your name on the timeline for the last 2 years since I've been doing it, and we've been trying this long to get you on the show, and finally here. And Liz is very delighted to see you as well. Hello, Dr. Asa. Good to see you on the show. Loads to talk about. Welcome to the show. So tell us a little bit about you, because you're very high up in the world of psychology, aren't you, and psychiatry?
I am in psychology, yes. And so as far as my background, who I am a clinical psychologist, trauma expert. I've worked in the field, believe it or not, I've worked in the field over 30 years. Wasn't a psychologist all this time. Began in mental health. Actually began in mental health in high school, working for two psychologists. I have worked in the field ever since. I've worked with, I'm actually not only a clinical psychologist, but I'm a trauma expert, and I'm a hostage negotiation specialist. I'm also a profiler. And so you take that combination and you have quite a character, I guess you would say. But yeah, go ahead.
No, it sounds absolutely. I mean, we could talk for ages about each of those.
Yeah.
What drew you to mental health in the first place? Obviously, you've been in it for a very long time, and you've been in it for many, many years. What was the draw there? First of all, what was the initial interest?
Well, the catalyst would have been, for me, looking back on it. I was in the hospital for roughly about 8.5, 9 months in 1980. And, you know, when you're in the hospital that long and in and out from then on, they encourage you to go and see a mental health therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, someone. And that was really the catalyst early on in my life. Long story short, I had a near-death experience in 1980, was poisoned, and was told, actually at one point, I had about 24 hours to live. And so, you know, told I'd never walk again, told I'd live less than a year once I got out. And so, you know, of course, this does a lot on your psyche when you're an 8, 9-year-old child.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so Yeah. So that was the driving point. I found a lot of comfort from that, a lot of resolve. And because of those experiences, I found
When
a
you, when you
lot of,
say when you say near death experience, is it like the ones we hear about where you see the white light and all that sort of stuff?
yes, certainly. It's funny. I was in a coma about a month, and what happened, I'll back it up here a bit, was I was swimming in a lake called Lake Thunderbird, cut my foot, and within a matter of hours had a 107-degree temp. From there, it became a systemic issue. And I'm talking kidney failure, heart failure, all of
Good
it.
God.
And I ended up going in. I mean, I've got scars all over. I had, in fact, one of the outcomes, something that's been a long-term effect, has been arthritis. But to answer your question, while I was in my most severe states and was basically on death's bed, my heart stopped. And I mean, I was technically dead. I felt sort of calling, I felt sort of a leading that, there's more to this world. And that, one of the biggest things, and one thing that I found fascinating was there was a little kid that came in my room. He was 6 years old at the time, and his name was Lamont Knight. And Lamont came in my room and would spend hours with me and hang out with me. We were on the critical floor, and found out later he had sickle cell anemia. But, you know, there was a calling not only to serve man or to serve humankind, but to sort of an understanding that we're all the same. It doesn't matter what our race is, we're all the same at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That was sort of something that clung to my heart at that point. And Lamont really taught me that. Sadly, I lost him the next year, but the thing is from all that, yes, I, I didn't see necessarily someone sit upon a throne, but I felt something deep inside, a sense, an understanding, if that's clear.
That there's a lot more to life than our everyday perceptions, shall we say?
Oh, certainly, certainly.
Yeah,
You
and I hear many accounts of it as well. I've talked about this book on the show before by Anita Morjani called "Dying to Be Me." She talks about her NDE, which is quite fascinating as well. Well, that's a great answer to the question of what drew you to mental health. I didn't expect you to say that.
yeah,
I thought you were going to say I was just quite interested in it. Thought I'd try,
yeah. No,
straight in with
that's
the big answer. Um,
yes.
and what with your patients at the moment? What is the most common thing that you help people with? What's the most common mental health issues at the moment? And does it differ depending on where you are in the world? Interestingly,
Well, it's funny. I'm no longer seeing. I don't have a private practice, and a lot of that has to do with the fact I'm not sure if you're familiar with rheumatoid arthritis, but I have rheumatoid arthritis.
oh,
And so it makes it very difficult to take notes, to jot notes.
right,
But there's a number of reasons why I left the field as far as seeing patients. I continued to consult, and I continued to work with folks in other capacities in the field of psychology, as well as working with practitioners themselves. A good example of that was there was a major event in Las Vegas a few years ago where there was a shooting from a hotel. And I received a call from a practitioner. I can't go into who it was, any of that. But, just knowing how to cope, how to manage, how to deal with this type of level of trauma. When I sat in negotiation, I've had threats. I've had guns held to me, and I've had knives pulled on me and sat with people for hours while dealing with their psychological issue, mental health issue. And so, it's funny because I never dreamt that my work would go into this perspective, and it had long ago. But it's I enjoy it now. I do a lot of speaking, I do a lot of consulting, And when I speak, speaking to audiences, to small groups as well, large ones. And, I find a lot of joy from that and comfort. But I
Mm.
still, I have to admit, I still get the occasional person reach out, and I try to guide them to someone that will work. But I think that naturally we're all counselors to some degree. And, and from my own human perspective, from my non-clinical perspective, I try to help people where I'm at and where they're at. And so, it's something, I miss seeing patients one-on-one. I really do. But, this is my new calling, I guess.
Well, I suppose doing the consulting work and the speaking, it allows you to get your work out to more people, I would have thought.
A broader audience for sure. Yes.
Broader
I
audience, yeah.
just, yeah, I was just on a show the other day, and from a lady that I've known for quite a while, and her niece was kidnapped last fall, and for 47 hours she was kidnapped. She was taken here in New York, made national and international news as far as Canada goes, and it was up there. She's a high profile than this lady is, and so now I have the pleasure of going on these shows like this. I don't often broadcast that I'm doing this, but I have, because she's a friend of mine. And, being able to be there for her time of need, being there for her and her sister-in-law, and hearing the heartache that comes with having a child ripped from your hands and missing for 47 hours.
It's
You know,
unimaginable.
it's unimaginable. And it's devastating, to the family. And it's not just, we often say the person that has been kidnapped as the one traumatized, but there's a vicarious effect. And that vicarious effect covers so many, it could cover, I was living in Edmonton. Give you an example of this. Is living in Edmonton, Alberta, at the time that 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And, I had children. I remember I had a child that was about 8, 9 years of age at the time, and her fear was, will this happen here? And am I going to feel safe? We don't think of that vicarious effect having a broader implication than just really right in our niche corner of the world. It can spread, especially with social media and the news and so forth. I had so many children come to me at that time in Edmonton, Alberta, of all places, asking, "Am I going to be safe?" And really, that's what we all want to feel: is, are we going to feel safe? Are we going to be affected by this?
How do you help someone feel safe when they're in that kind of state? What would your approach be? Because it's a very noble goal, certainly. And I don't think anyone in the world wasn't affected by events like 9/11 and things like that.
No, certainly not. Well, it's first and foremost, especially a child, you take a child, children typically, let's say that, the disclaimer, typically are resilient.
Yes, they
And
tend to bounce back quickly once the right buttons are pressed, so to speak.
that's right. And we are all, to some degree, resilient. It depends on how our makeup, our background. Our children, or the children, are they in a home that is loving, that there's affection, that there's security already in place? If we
So it
don't
begins
feel
to
them inside, yeah, it's hard to feel resilient. And often we have implications like reactive attachment disorder, because of that instability in the home. If that
What is
stability,
reactive attachment disorder for the unenlightened?
what was that? What is
What
reactive
is,
attachment?
yeah,
Okay, reactive attachment disorder is that inability to feel attachment, to feel secure. It's often caused from a home that there's abuse, that there's neglect, there's maltreatment. A child that's incapable of having that bond, essentially what that is. And so for some children, they become very clingy, and for other children, they say, no, I don't need you. They become detached, and that's it in a nutshell. But reactive attachment can affect so many perspectives of a child's life and an adult's life. As we grow and mature, if we have had that experience, if that's been a part of our life, reactive attachment, it's going to affect how we see relationships overall.
How would you go about healing something like that? I mean, because you're right, it would come through to the adult life, in my limited knowledge of psychology, until the pattern's broken. How would you seek to break that pattern, or begin to?
Again, I first want to find out. Now, I don't believe in digging up old ghosts, but I do believe in going into the past and finding out where we're coming from. I need the history. And so that's the first thing I often do with clients or patients, is finding out their history. And from there, trying to discover what is it that is missing, and letting them know, we all, at the end of the day, we all want to feel secure. We want to feel love. We want to feel acceptance. We want to feel that we're worthy. And that all comes to our own heart. Neil, I could never make you feel loved. I can never make you feel secure. Neil, you have to have that within you to feel secure and love, that unconditional state. And so what I try to do is teach them, how is it? What does that feel like? What does that look like? What does the word unconditional mean to you? And if they don't have a relationship with that, I try to teach them that, and then we deal with a lot of the trauma. The reason I do that is, if you're not in a safe space here, you're not going to be in a safe space with the rest of it.
No, I mean, if there's one thing that I've come to believe over the last few years, that's safe space to be yourself, to process your emotions. Me and my friends, we do it for each other, and it's so important, and it informs quite a lot of my work on here. And you're absolutely right. And you're absolutely right that you can't, much as you'd want to with every fiber of your being, you can't zap someone with it. But you can, I suppose, over a process, teach people to find it within themselves with support in that safe space, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. And, it's to take on to another subject, you take a toxic relationship, for instance. A lot of people go to those toxic relationships. They invite them into their own lives. Now, not necessarily is it a desire, a conscious desire, but rather an unconscious desire. Something that we say, listen, this is my familiarity. This is something that I think I am worthy of, or that I find acceptable, or that I feel that I deserve. And you might think, well,
is it kind of better the devil you know?
The devil you know. And so by doing that, we invite them in. Again, it's that same, it's really so basic, come into that, that state of unconditional, that we often make it complex. And the reason we make it complex is then we have excuses. Oh, it's too hard to find self-love. It's too hard to come to a place of really approving of myself and really loving myself. I can't do it.
But I suppose it comes down to putting your own oxygen mask on first, and picking up on what you're saying. If people were in that unconditional state, they'd be a lot more choosy about the relationships they invite into their life. But if they think this is the best I can get, or it's the best I deserve, or like you say, it's hard to find, if they're telling those stories, that's going to be their experience until the story changes, I guess, isn't it?
It is, and it certainly is. And when it comes to that state, it's something that it's attainable for anyone. It's a matter of, and I hate saying this, but a lot of practitioners, there are a number of practitioners, let's say it that way, that don't have their own relationship with that state. And I've worked with those practitioners.
Do you know,
but, yeah, go ahead.
No, after you, sorry.
No, I was going to say, it's the field, most fields, there's something that attracts an individual to the field.
Yeah. Do you know when I studied NLP, which I'm sure you're familiar with, for those listening,
And
neurolinguistic programming, um, it was full of really wounded people that were
mm,
trying to heal their lives by healing other
mm,
people's lives. And
mm,
it just didn't work because it's like you say, they got to have that. It all starts with you, the individual. They got to have that relationship with self first.
mm,
And it was. You're right. I don't know why it attracts these people. No, I don't know why, but it did. It was absolutely full of these wounded people. They just come through a really traumatic experience, and they thought they could somehow feel better by magically, I don't know, zapping other people with fairy angel dust. But it doesn't work, does it?
it doesn't. And then I'll be honest, and I'll give another disclaimer here, and that is, doing the work as long as I've done the work, I have found and discovered that I myself have gained a lot of tools. I have gained a lot from the experience. My
Mm.
patients, I should be paying them at times, because I have learned so much from them. And, with all my education, set that all aside, I would say my best teacher has been my patient at the end of the day. I've
But many
learned
great
so much.
doctors say that. Many great practitioners say that, and I can understand because it will give you such an appreciation of the breadth, I suppose, of human experience and the things that can trip us up and the things that we find healthy. Liz says, Dr. Asa, what an amazing story. I never expected you to say that. And in having the NDE and being so poorly and then still achieving your dreams, do you find now that you're a very philosophical person in everyday life, pragmatic, practical, or has the experience made you more spiritual? Good question from Liz.
It is so much there. Let me unpack that. So, has it had an effect upon how I achieve dreams? Has it had an effect upon my everyday life? Yes, certainly has. And without getting into all that, because I know we only have a certain amount of time, but I've had more than one near-death experience. And so, having had more than one near-death experience, it has had a profound effect. And let me tell you this too. I've worked with a number of individuals with NDEs, and some, it's a funny thing. Some become very resilient. It just sort of fuels them as an individual. And other people they wither within, and you won't see them again. And it's sad, or they hate the world, and they become odds with it. And so that's what NDEs can do for you.
So wait a minute. So some come back super resilient,
Yes.
as it were, like Anita Morjani and I mentioned. Why do you think some people wither and hate the world? Is it because what they experience seems so much better than the world and they don't want to come back?
This could be. I haven't given that a lot of perspective, or a lot of thought, but that certainly could be one of the effects. I think that in other cases, it depends on what it was that traumatized them,
Mm.
or what their near-death experience was that could have had an effect, and they feel, you know, let me give you an example of my own self. I was told to never walk again. I was told I would live a year. I was told I went into surgery to have this arm amputated, my left arm amputated. I was told so many things that I could have become very bitter. I mean, I was the typical kid playing baseball. Couldn't play baseball anymore. And so, you take that into consideration. If there's someone just like me, they may have taken that and felt, well, this isn't right. I hate life. I wanted to play baseball, or I wanted to do this or that. And so I think that it's their perspectives. And again, I hate, beating the same drum, but going to, it comes down to who they were before the event to happen. And were they resilient? Were they, insulated? For a lot of children, that going back to RAD, for reactive attachment, by the way, for a lot of children that have reactive attachment, the ones that don't, that often have a hard time bouncing back, are not insulated. They don't have those protective surroundings, those protective fibers in their lives.
So
Whether
it needs that. It's the importance of that safe space from the earliest possible time. And in that safe space, they can start to develop their own internal safe space. And that, I suppose, would lead to resilience. It's right.
exactly,
Yeah, I
exactly. And
understand.
so, so yeah, and so she asked a couple other things. What else did she ask? She said,
She said, still achieve your dreams. Have you become very philosophical in everyday life, pragmatic, practical, or has the experience made you more spiritual? She's covering all the bases there, isn't she?
my favorite. So I'll do this. So my first degree is in theology, religion, and even although I knew I was going into psych, my master's and my doctorate are both in psychology, and
Interesting.
so I went into the field. I would say since that time. I mean, I was um, thinking I was going to be in the field of religion, but that has changed. I would say I've become more and more spiritual. And, I'm also part Native, by the way. And so I was raised in a school system where I went to Native school and I went to public school both. And I've gained a lot of appreciation for my Native ancestry.
Mm.
And I would say, that part of me. And I would say that it's had a profound effect. The near-death experience made me understand a lot of those traditions. And I appreciate life itself more. And so, to answer a question, yes, it's made me more spiritual. Yes, it's made me more philosophical. And just ask my children. There are many times we sit down and have philosophical conversations. I'm sure there is the ones involved, but I think they appreciate it. But
Oh, I think they do. I do it with Ashley. If I discover some new insight or something like that, Ashley's my daughter. I say, "Darling, got to tell you this," and she tolerates me very well. But I think they log it all away. I think if they know you're
yes,
coming from a good place, that they don't tend to mind our kids.
yeah.
I think that's a lovely thing. Um, let's pop another comment on the screen. Here we go. Liz again. Dr. Asa, I'm content in my own skin. I'm content to give and have the unconditional love in my life. And yes, I'm very choosy about who gets the accolade, but it's so worth it. I have the right people around me, very close, uncomplicated relationships, and it's generally lovely and safe. So many adventures and good times and good vibes. It doesn't have to be complicated. I don't need to be asked with other people's drama. I've been through a lot, says Liz, and I know Liz personally, and I know she has. I was going to ask you about trauma. The word has come more into our lexicon a lot recently, and what I've learned about trauma from the people that its practitioners or the people involved in the field, there's so-called big T trauma, 9/11, for example, but there's also what's so-called small T trauma, losing a job, losing a relationship, things like that. And by that definition, would it be fair to say that everyone has got a little bit of trauma, do you think?
Actually, I would agree with that. And that, going back to 9/11, or you go to what the events in Paris a few years ago, or those are major events, but you go to something, first looking at those major events, we're all traumatized today to some degree in that we've all heard of these events. We learn of them.
Yeah.
My children have learned of them in school. They learn about 9/11 in school. They learn about such events in school. So, and we teach history. And so history itself has trauma, a lot of trauma. But as far as the small traumas, you take look at something like, um, we had an event here recently where a husband and wife were murdered, or the husband murdered the wife. Let me back up, sorry. But it was a murder-suicide. And you think about that murder-suicide, the neighbors around that person were traumatized. Because of, wow, that was my neighbor. I can't believe that. The children that this family had, they had children. Their children went to school. They continued in school. Those children were traumatized. They now project that upon other children. Well, that's a pretty serious implication there. But you lose a job. it can affect so many things, and especially in the economies that we're in today and the instability in our markets. It can have a profound effect upon a family, and that would be
Mm,
very traumatizing. Just the instability, not knowing where our next meal's going to come from. But yes, there are even smaller traumas, and we hear the word so loosely used, and a hangnail, can be very traumatic. Well, okay, what if the person, so here's my philosophical side. What if the person's a hand model? Yes, it'd be very traumatic, but it really depends on context. That's what I'm trying to say. It depends on the
mm.
context and who that person is and where they're coming from and why it trauma. I do think it's used too readily and too loosely, in some
Yeah, yeah,
context.
we find that words get bandied around an awful lot.
They certainly do.
Narcissism, there's another one. Gaslighting, there's another one. It all gets bandied around an
Oh,
awful lot, doesn't it?
it's the popular, yeah, it's the popular word of the day. Gaslighting is definitely one of those.
Yeah, very much so. And I think, I suppose the danger in that is it can cheapen it for the people that are really experiencing it. Because, true
Certainly,
narcissism is not funny. True gaslighting is not funny.
no,
But it's not, let's make sure it's the real thing before we start banding the words around.
certainly.
I'm going to put some more comments on the screen.
Oh, please.
Elizabeth says, my best therapy has been real life recently. Robert Van Buren, who's a clockmaker, a horologist. Hi, Neil and Asa. I think with a name like that, he should be an international dance DJ, personally. Elizabeth Green says, damn, nothing much spiritual happened in my family, but I forgive them. She also says, along with all the trauma, don't we get over things faster and faster? We notice more and let it go. I do. That's interesting. Is that a happy side effect of resilience, do you think? Does that show growth?
It is, and I mean, I think so. The other side of that is there was a study done a few years ago on children in the Middle East and the amount of trauma they're exposed to every day, and they seem to prove more resilient than
Mm.
children in Western cultures. That they're not exposed to the same kind of trauma and war and strife, and we're less resilient. And I think a part of that is that it's like anything. You take a hammer, and if you're a carpenter, you hit your thumb. Excuse me. You're going to repeat that, but over time, it's going to become part of the game, part of the job. And I think that's what trauma does. For some people, they become so used to it that that's not such a big deal. Or it's a big deal, but I'll overcome it. It's just one more hurdle. You see.
Yes, I suppose in a greater, grander context, it's just a part. It's a part of life, not the whole enchilada. And I suppose people in war situations would become, I suppose, desensitized after a
Yes,
while.
yes,
You'd need
yes,
to
very
be.
much.
You'd need to be. Otherwise you go crazy. Paul Claris says, "Hi, sorry late to the show today. I'm helping a friend. Paul always seems to be helping people. He's a lovely man who's going through a
Mhm.
mental health crisis. Just wants to talk. And nice to
Mm,
finally hear Asa's voice. It's so good to finally have you on the show, Dr. Asa. I've been angling for this for ages. It's so lovely to meet you. I too have
yeah.
had a near-death experience. It was during my bowel cancer treatment. And one night the tumour caused a
Mm,
massive hemorrhage. I was rushed to hospital, taken immediately into resus, and was going to cardiac arrest. I have a young doctor to thank because he didn't panic. Had recently dealt with a and he's run out of
mm.
space there. We need the rest of that. Don't leave us hanging, Paul. A young doctor to thank, and he recently dealt with a what? We'll have the rest of that comment, please. So, how do you find the best way of treating trauma is? In my understanding, it's and again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm only a layperson. It's teaching that person's nervous system to access more the parasympathetic state, the calm
Mhm.
state again, rather than constantly high alert. Is that right?
It is, and it is coming to that safe place. And by the way, if I share anything of past patients, they've given me permission to do so. I won't ever give their name, divulge the name, but I had a patient that was in a severe car wreck and ended off the bridge. in a city here in the States. And so, by the way, I'm a Canadian and American. I'm a dual citizen of both countries.
Where are
So
you right now, by the way?
right now, New York State. I'm in a
Right.
town. We're in the country. We live out in the country, which I prefer being with around, nature. And
Mm,
so, but we've lived here about 10 years. Moved here from British Columbia 10 years ago.
mm, mm.
So,
You were saying
so
your patient in the car wreck.
yeah. So I had a patient that was in a pretty severe car wreck and could, and in the city that he lived, um, had a difficult time because it's all bridges. And so everywhere was a bridge. If you wanted to go grocery shop, it was a bridge. If you wanted to go here, it was a bridge. And so one of the things is we do need to come to that safe space, as I mentioned earlier, and how to get to that. There's several different, I'm very eclectic when it comes to therapy, but I also have my own philosophies as well. And so I do rate those as well. I find that they are quite effective. You know, everything I'm talking, not my to clarify that, but we first had to come to a place to understand that, how many wrecks occur on a bridge? How many times does this occur? Understand that this isn't going. How many times have you been in a wreck? First and foremost, come to a place to understand this. Life happens. Stuff happens, but also recognize how many times have you traveled without having this. So it's coming,
Yes.
neurologically. Yes, we have to look at what can we do to recondition our thoughts, our hyperactive emotion, and calm that. I do a lot of things with my patients, from everything from breathing to meditation to other methodologies that seem to, it's a combination. There's not one gateway to helping someone with trauma. That answers your question.
Mm,
I wish there was one path. I wish there was one saying, you do this and tomorrow you'll be healed. I've worked with hypnotherapy some. I'm not a hypnotherapist. I've been trained in some of it, but I'm not a hypnotherapist.
well,
But this too can be effective.
in my, again, layman's understanding, because I'd read that meditation helps, that mindfulness, same thing, helps,
It does. Yeah.
hypnosis helps, tapping, emotional freedom technique helps, breathing
They are.
helps. I couldn't work out the common factor, but I'd heard this, certainly anecdotal evidence, that, let's say, for example, someone had quite serious surgery, these holistic practices would speed up
Mhm.
healing, and I couldn't understand why until relatively recently, when I came to understand the common factor is it's a portal to the parasympathetic nervous system,
Mhm.
and all healing begins there. Conversely, if you're in the opposite one, sympathetic, there's no healing
Mhm.
there. That is pure survival. That's pure fight or flight, and not a lot of healing
Yes.
happens there. But we do have this opposite system within us that can, through good practitioners such as yourself, we can be taught to access. And I guess is that the key? Am I right?
It is, and you really have to find out. I hate saying this, not everyone's the same, but when you have someone come into your practice that has a traumatic experience, you need to find out their history. You need to find out what's going on with them, and find out, what's going on here. I mean, is this someone that's, you know, um, is this a one-time single dose of trauma, or is this multiple traumas? Now,
Yeah.
earlier it said multiple traumas may not have an effect on someone that's been traumatized multiple times, but that's not always the case either. There are people that are affected every time they're traumatized, and it just becomes more and more compounded. And over time, it just breaks them as a human being. And, and getting into that, is it sympathetic? It's it's one of those things that when I'm looking at the neurology of an individual, when I'm looking at that side, that perspective of an individual, trying to figure out, what what is going on with this individual's cognitive state. I want to figure out, it. I do want to know that. I do want to understand that, but I want to figure out what is it that's really being affected. You know, a, a better example. Let me go here real quick for a moment. You have someone come into your office and they have been dealing with, an addiction. Addictions often, we often say, well, a person is addicted because of the chemical background to that.
No,
Yes,
it's an
chemical.
avoidance behavior normally, isn't it? Addiction.
There's something much more, much deep rooted. Exactly. And if you, so going to the heart of that, for a majority of people that have an addiction, it's because it's something that they're trying to deal with, they're trying to manage. It's something that brings them comfort. Very few people become an addict in a moment. I worked with a
Yeah.
number of addicts in Seattle, and now I was not the addiction counselor. I was the person working with psychology. I was working with the courts, to be honest, with the judges, and so they would send these patients to me, and often we were, I had a kid that was around 16 years of age, just got his license, was arrested for drinking and driving. And of course, they said, "You're an addict, got to do this." No, he was stupid in that case. I'm going to be honest. He was out with the buddies, out drinking. He wasn't an addict. He'd never
No,
even
that's not.
had much to do.
That's just a dumb
It's not,
mistake.
it's just a dumb mistake. And no, you shouldn't be doing that. Whereas on the other hand, I've had patients that have come in that have had a lifelong attachment to addiction and to that addiction issue. And really, what we have to do is set aside the addiction. We'll deal with the addiction later. Let's look at what their background is. Let's look at
Mm.
why they chose to go to that addiction. What was it that gave them comfort from that addiction? And by the way, addiction doesn't have to be chemicals, it doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol or something else. It could be something like work. It can be something like, neglecting your family. It can be spending too much time with your family, too much time at work, too much time with school, too much, it
It's
really
an
depends on
excess of anything, isn't it? Which
that.
we latch onto, because I had a very dear friend that was addicted to alcohol.
Mhm,
And you're absolutely right. It was deeper issues that he had, and he was using alcohol to numb that pain that he felt. But of course,
mhm,
it didn't make it any better. It just made it worse. And first, he had to get off the alcohol, and then he could do the therapy because the therapy couldn't land on a alcohol-addled mind.
mhm.
And he's doing much better now. But yeah, it's always like you say, that avoidant behavior. But it's interesting. We can become addicted to anything. I never heard of addiction of spending too much time with your family, but I suppose we can get addicted to anything, can't we?
You can, and and why I say that, I mean, no, I let me set that back for a moment, and that I think that you can spend. It would be difficult to spend too much time with your family. I love spending time with my wife and my children and my family, and I don't feel like I could have enough. But if you're
No, I
neglecting
never
them,
get bored seeing
you
Ashley,
know,
but yeah.
yeah, believe me, I've had moments where I've said, okay, I'm procrastinating from work. Then okay, that's not necessarily an addiction, but you know, but anyhow, yeah, it's funny how addictions. We often almost with addictions, it's like anything, psychological. We stigmatize the issue, and if you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic, and you're going to have 31 days, and you're going to have 6 months, you're going to have 6 years. And what I try to teach my patients: don't become that you've been plagued with. Don't become your disorder. Don't become, we're not going, I don't believe in, I diagnose someone. If I have to diagnose someone, I try to teach them not to become the issue that they're challenged with. It's the same as
Mm.
cancer. If you have a cancer or a broken leg, you don't become a broken leg. You don't become a cancer. Nor should you become narcissistic. Nor should you become, schizophrenic. You have schizophrenia. You have an addiction, but you're not that addiction. Does
Mm.
that make sense? You're not schizophrenic. You have schizophrenia. But if we speak of someone with schizophrenia, well, that person's schizophrenic. No, they have schizophrenia, just as the same as they have a cancer.
That's interesting because it gives a certain distance, it gives a certain detachment, doesn't it? Because the more people become the observer of it, rather than caught up in it and identify with it, I suppose the easier it is to treat from that detached perspective, maybe.
Certainly. And I think too, it's the same again, like the cancer, you know, we will do whatever we can to fight that cancer, certainly. And we'll talk about that cancer, but we don't want to identify with that cancer.
No.
And and I think a lot of times the mistake, especially in addiction, is identifying with it. And it's like, so one of my other philosophies is, people that I've worked with, especially retirees from police and special forces and so forth, a lot of times when they quit working or they're forced to stop working in those jobs, a lot of times they'll look at themselves and say, I'm nobody. I have nothing. I've lost everything that I am. No, what you were doing is part of your life. If you were not, I'm not, yes, I have a degree in psychology and I have degrees in other things and I've done work in other fields, but those aren't the things that I am. And if I can learn to appreciate who I am, these are just tools in my tool belt. These are just things I've happened to do.
It all comes down to the individual. It comes down to you, your individual values, your individual state of being. And that's what makes up a person, I think you're saying, rather than, academic qualifications on paper, so to speak, which are valuable, but they're not the be all and end all necessarily.
They're not. No.
Continued from Paul Claridge. I had a young doctor thing because he didn't panic, part 2, and recently dealt with a similar issue and knew what to do to save my life. And of course, going through cancer itself makes me appreciate life more. We hear lots of people say that, don't we? Having experienced what it was like to be abandoned by friends when I was ill, I vowed never to let toxic people into my life again, and also vowed to never abandon true friends when they're in need. Nice one, Paul. Elizabeth Green says, what are your thoughts? I finally started losing weight, working out and walking. The lighter the body, the lighter my being. Okay. I was on a call last night, actually, Elizabeth, where it was a sort of a metaphysical call, and the teacher said the first step to enlightenment is to lighten up. So a lighter state of being, I guess, is what we're looking for. Graham says, what are your typical patients? Who are your typical patients and what are their issues? Elizabeth says, yeah, agreeing with you. My friend has an expression, don't wear your wound. Because I think a lot of people would do that. There was a book written once, Caroline Myss, I think, wrote it, and she coined the term woundology. And it's also like, it's almost like wearing wounds as a badge of honor. Who's got the biggest wound? But that doesn't help to heal it. That doesn't, because then you become it. That's the whole identity. I'm the cancer victim. I'm this, I'm that. But you're not. You just have it. You're not it. And I think that's a really important distinction that you've made there, Dr. Asa.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, and it's funny because we identify with things because it gives us meaning. That's really why we identify. It makes me feel valued. It makes me feel appreciated. It makes me feel worthy. And really, all those things, all those qualities should come from within ourselves. If I, to go back to toxic, someone else was mentioning toxicity. I think it was Paul. But, when it comes to toxicity, it's like this. When I choose to have someone toxic in my life and continue to have someone toxic in my life, we may not have known they were toxic when we first met them. And I don't care if it's friends, family, or others. If I have someone that's toxic in my life and I realize they're toxic, I'll give them an opportunity to help them and, hopefully to find a better way. But if they continue to prove toxic, I have to create boundaries and I have to be firm with those boundaries. And, and it's difficult. It was something hard for me to learn, but it's a healthy perspective because if I keep inviting toxicity into my life, it's the same as taking poison. You're going to end up being poisoned. And it's going to end up affecting you as an individual. And you may yourself become toxic. And it continues like a virus, and it's so important to understand. And as I was saying earlier as well, about inviting toxic people, but also living in those relationships, the best thing for us to do when we're in those relationships is not only to create a boundary, but to look at ourselves, to understand that, to come to an understanding of what I deserve. Why do I deserve this? Why do I deserve this toxicity? Start deciding for yourself, am I going to choose this, or do I want a healthier route? Do I want a healthier path in life? If I
Yeah.
decide to choose toxicity, your life is going to be what that toxicity is.
Yeah.
And
Boundaries has been an interesting one for me because I've recently had to learn it and draw some boundaries with say a friend of mine
oh,
when the toxicity just became too much. And
a
of course, most people, I think a lot of toxic people will make you feel that it's your problem. They can gaslight quite well and make you feel
lot of them are
responsible.
narcissists. Mhm.
Sorry.
And so there's often narcissism in a lot of those cases.
Yes, and there is narcissism here as well. Trust me. And so once you've got over the issue that it's not you, it's them, it's a question of what to do about it. And you're right, you do have to be firm with those boundaries because it comes back to why would you let yourself down that way? And look at yourself and go, wait a minute, I deserve better than this and I can choose this. So why wouldn't I? So why would I let someone treat me that way, drag me down that way? And if this person wants to carry on being this way, fine, let him. It's not my monkeys, it's not my circus, but don't involve me in it. I'm not going to have anything to do with it. And you're right, you do have to be firm about it. I think we want to be nice people and be welcoming to everyone, but I'm afraid that simply doesn't work. Sometimes always boundaries are necessary. In fact, the best relationships do have healthy boundaries, if you know what I mean.
They do, and that's for couples all the way across. Neil, you were mentioning your daughter, and one thing about your daughter that I want you to think about it: would you allow her? I should say, would you want your daughter to stay in an unhealthy, toxic relationship? I mean, what would you
Not
do
for 1
about that?
second, not for a
So,
nanosecond.
yeah, why would you allow yourself to be in that toxic relationship? So
Exactly.
we do it more, right? We accept it because it was just me. I'd be damned if it was my children. I would go to hell, hit hell and high water. I mean, whatever it takes to
Yeah.
prevent my mom
Yeah.
from doing that,
I would
right?
definitely. And back to Ashley for a minute. I mean, I think we do have very healthy boundaries, but we have a great relationship. We're very close, and it's
Mhm.
because of those boundaries, and it's because of great banter. But boundaries are there as they have to be. And you're right. My God, I'd crawl over broken glass if I thought she was in a toxic relationship. Paul Claridge, he's very vocal, this man today, and we enjoy him that way. Asa, how do you as a therapist stop your clients' feelings, emotions, and issues from affecting your own mental health? Good question.
Mm.
A friend of mine was a psychologist, but had to give it up as she found it was affecting her own mental well-being. That said, she's one of my best friends. She kicks my ass when I need it, which I think is a medical term. Helps me get my head straight when I need that. Likewise, she knows she can rely on me when she needs help. Or that often costs me a bottle of wine too. Only one bottle, Paul. You disappoint me. What do you think, Asa?
It depends on the type of wine. It might be. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good vintage,
No,
please.
yeah, it's a good vintage. As far as psychology and how it affects my own life, I had to learn early on to create boundary. I mean, I hate saying that, but create a boundary, but also to understand that whatever's going on in someone else's life, I don't take ownership of. It's not mine.
Yeah,
And I had to learn that key because if I didn't have that key, I would close the door and keep their issues within me. Instead, I learned to unlock that door, allow that stuff to go and not be mine, not invite it deep in with myself. And it's something that it was a lesson to learn. As I say, I've been doing this over 30 years as far as psychology goes, and plus some because of high school and college. Um, but it's something that it takes a lot of personal insight, willingness to recognize that the issues that are being brought to me, it's no different than watching a flick on a movie. You know, I can watch a movie and walk away from it and realize I'm not going to be kidnapped tomorrow. I can watch a movie and realize that the tower that I'm in is not going to collapse. or hope
No,
that it's not going to
you can
come.
watch Silence of the Lambs and not turn into a flesh-eating cannibal. I get it. Yeah.
Well, only on Tuesdays. I love
Tuesday's Father
Chianti.
Bean Day.
Yeah, Fava Bean and Chianti.
Yeah.
Anyways, um, but sorry, my son. I'm actually at home here. My son was just in for school, so was
Oh,
give me
hi.
the I love you sign. So
Oh, that's cool. Hi to him too.
yes, but no, it's the best thing I learned was to be able to create that boundary, but also to understand that I'm not neglecting my patient by not taking their issues inside myself and making them mine. Because what I'm doing is, if I make their issues mine, I'm inviting them in. I'm now identifying with their
That would be
issues,
a
and I
bit like seeing someone drowning and rather than throwing him a rope, jumping in with him and drowning with him, wouldn't it?
exactly,
You
exactly.
cannot, and this is what I'm always, and actually having you say this is so validating for me because I'm not a psychological professional. I just have a layperson's interest in it, but I am pretty sure that taking on other people's issues is not a healthy thing to do. Ultimately, and I think some people find it very hard to know where they begin and other people where they end and other people begin. People without boundaries, they tend to absorb everything. I suppose that's why empaths, lovely people that they
Mhm,
are, can attract narcissists. Um,
mhm,
so maybe lovely that empaths are, they need to learn even more to create those
mhm,
healthy boundaries. Otherwise, it's just a question of you'll end up drowning with them rather than sending them the rope to pull them to shore. So I hope that
mhm.
answers your question, Paul. We've talked about it quite a lot on the show. Not so easy, says Elizabeth, dealing with that situation with my daughter. If I broach anything, we don't talk for 6 months. Goodness me. Paul, that's great and so true. I do that to Neil as close and old friends. He doesn't always appreciate it at the time. I do appreciate it deep down, but at the time, no, probably not. Although we do have each other's backs always. Graham says, "Oh, Graham, I can only apologise to him. He thinks he's funny."
That's
Another
okay.
friend says, "Paul is a paramedic. He's our resident comedian." Another friend of mine is a paramedic. I've also asked how she copes with what she sees every day. She says, as sad as it sounds, she has to be like a robot, show care when she's with the patient, but switch off emotionally as much as she can. Likewise, another mate was a firefighter. He's learned to switch off his emotions. But yeah, again, this is boundaries. It's all boundaries. It's all boundaries and not taking on other stuff.
Well, Paul was saying that he has a friend that was a firefighter. I'm actually a volunteer firefighter, Neil,
Are you? Goodness
and
me.
so I don't know if you knew that or not, but I have been a
No.
volunteer firefighter for 10 years, but I've worked with first responders for almost, I would say, close to 25 years in various capacities. And I went through boot camp 10 years ago. I was one of the oldest that went through boot camp and did that in New York and in Canada. I don't know how it is where you're at, but 80% of our firefighters in both countries are volunteer. We've got a large number of volunteer firefighters in
I
both
didn't know
countries.
that. No, I don't think it's that many over here. I think we do have them. I know we have
Yeah,
volunteer police, but I didn't.
we have
No,
all.
certainly not 80%. No way.
Yeah, and so we have. I mean, without that, we would have no fire departments. I mean, to be honest, and I mean, they'd have to rethink how they're organized them. But yeah, so I've as I had to learn. I recall I went to a fire where there were 5 lives lost. I was sick and apparatus on the scene, or truck, by the way, apparatus on the scene, and of course they know I'm a psychologist. So first, their instinct was an individual was there. They had me go to him and speak with him. One of the
You're
victims.
kind of a one-stop shop, aren't you? Save people from a burning building, counsel them afterwards, talk them out of a hostage situation.
Yeah, I guess so.
You're
But
it's quite
but
quite a
no,
skill set.
but I had to, take myself aside, because I actually have seen victims of fire and
Mm.
fire related incidents, traffic and what have you, and re-gear myself in a way that I'd never thought of. Because, it's one thing to work with someone that's been victimized. It's another thing to be there and to vicariously be victimized by a situation like that. And I all back in Canada was involved in a situation where some youth were killed, and I was on the scene as a psychologist. That's a lot different than being that firefighter trying to rescue someone. And you take it, and it's a different way of taking it personal. And I had to think about it. I went home and I thought about it for a while, and for quite a while, and I've thought it over the last few years. And it's the same principle as a psychologist. I cannot take this personal. I cannot identify with this. It's a shame what's happened. And I'm an empathetic individual. I had to set that aside. I had to learn not to be so empathic because, as a youth and someone that's been through things I've gone through, and I find that's true with anyone that's been truly traumatized in childhood, you often see them become empathic because they can feel, they understand what it is to be traumatized.
They do, but then the problem is they over-identify with it, and then,
Okay.
like we said
Right.
earlier in the conversation, and then they become it. So this detachment and boundaries, I think, is certainly
It's,
my biggest takeaway from this conversation. Dr. Asa, it's been. So, do you have a website, by the way? People can find you. Can I pop that on
I
screen?
do, which I need to work on it. But yes, I do have a website. It's asadonbrown.com. ASADNBROWN.com. So forgive it. It's been a while. But
Oh, dear, no, I've spelled that wrong. Hold on, let's get rid of that typo.
other than that, I'm also on various social media, Facebook and LinkedIn and so forth.
Well, can I also thank you for all your valuable contributions to the show over the years. It really is lovely having you on the timeline and getting your perspective on things because you've got a great perspective to offer. And finally, we've got you on. Thank you, Dr. Asa, so much for being on the Midday Show. Thank you for getting up early as well, because I know you're 5 hours behind in New York. So it's probably just about 8 o'clock now in New York. So thank you ever so much for that as well. And absolutely lovely to meet you, and come and see us again sometime.
I would love to. And perhaps the next time we can find one subject. I knew there was so much we could cover today. I had no.
Oh, we could literally talk all day. I mean, if you'd like to come back on and you want to focus on one particular subject, I'm very happy to devote an hour to it, subject of your choice at some point, if you like.
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate you.
But for now, Dr. Asa, all the very best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a show. What a show. What a man. And we've been angling to get him for ages, but we do, because we bring you the best guests here on the Midday Show. And I hope you got some good takeaways from that. Comes down to boundaries, doesn't it? Those all important boundaries. Russ and Phil and Chantal, Screen Queen, and maybe the odd theatre critic thrown in, will be here on Friday with the Midday Show. And I'll see you next Monday with Russ Kane. But in the meantime, thank you ever so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the Midday Show today. And once again, thank you to our incredible guest, Dr. Asa Don Brown. Good afternoon.